You ever look at a really bright kid in a classroom who just can't seem to focus? It's so easy to think it's about willpower, right? But it's usually not. Today, we're going to dive into something profound and honestly, often invisible: the impact of childhood stress on a brain's ability to learn.
I mean, it's that question, right? The one that's just filled with frustration that teachers and parents ask all the time. It kind of assumes the problem is just a lack of effort. But what if the answer has nothing to do with trying harder? What if something way more fundamental is going on deep inside that child's brain? So let's meet Min. He's 7 years old. He's sitting in math class, and he just can't remember the multiplication tables they learned yesterday. Now, his mind isn't empty because he's lazy. No, it's the opposite. It is full. Every single ounce of his mental energy is busy scanning for danger, listening for the sound of fast footsteps in the hallway that, for him, might signal a threat. Why? Because that's what his experiences have hardwired his brain to do. And that really gets to the heart of our first big idea here. This isn't a story about motivation or schoolwork. It's about a brain doing its most essential, most primitive job: survival. Okay, so think about it. The brain has one primary job, and that's to keep you safe, period. When a child's nervous system senses danger, real or perceived, it reallocates all its resources. Learning? Well, that becomes a luxury. It gets pushed way to the back of the line, far behind the absolute urgent need to stay safe. So what's actually going on here on a biological level? Let's get into the mechanics of the brain's stress response. I'm sure you've heard of the fight or flight response. Well, when Min's brain perceives a threat, his sympathetic nervous system just takes over. His heart starts pounding, his breathing gets faster, and his body dumps a shot of glucose into his system for a quick burst of energy. And honestly, it's a brilliant, ancient survival tool. But here's a really critical distinction we have to make. Not all stress is bad. A short burst, what we call acute stress, can actually help us learn. It can make our memories more vivid. The real problem, the dangerous part, is when that state of high alert just never shuts off. That's when stress becomes chronic. And who's the main culprit in this long-term state of emergency? Well, it's a hormone called cortisol. To keep up that constant vigilance, the brain just floods the system with it. And when cortisol levels stay high for way too long, well, the very mechanism that was designed to protect us actually starts to do some serious damage. And we're not just talking about mood or feelings here. This is huge. Chronic stress physically rewires the very architecture of a developing brain. It literally changes how it's built, right from the ground up. Okay, so one of the first and biggest victims of this cortisol invasion is a part of the brain called the hippocampus. You can think of it as the brain's learning and memory headquarters. It's absolutely critical for processing new info and locking in long-term memories.
And this brings us right back to Min, sitting in his math class. See, all that cortisol, day after day, can literally damage the neurons in his hippocampus. It weakens his brain's ability to form new memories. And all of a sudden, a simple task like memorizing multiplication tables, it becomes incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible.
Now, to really get a sense of the stakes here, I want you to think about this number: 15,000. That's roughly how many connections or synapses a single neuron has in a toddler's brain. 15,000. It's this incredibly dense, super-connected network just waiting to be shaped by what happens next. So, over time, the brain tries to get more efficient. It does this through a process called synaptic pruning. You can think of it like, well, like gardening. It's a use it or lose it system. The connections that get used a lot get stronger, and the ones that don't, they get trimmed away. And here's the thing: the child's environment is what dictates the pruning. It's like a fork in the road for the brain. In a safe, engaging environment, the brain strengthens all those pathways for logic, planning, and learning. But in a threatening environment, it strengthens the pathways for being on high alert, for detecting danger, for reacting impulsively. And those other pathways, the ones for academic thinking, they can literally get weakened or pruned away entirely. Okay, so this isn't just some neat theory. It's actually backed by some really powerful evidence. Let's take a look at how scientists measure these experiences and what the data is telling us.
So, researchers have a tool they use to measure this kind of early life stress. It's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Questionnaire, or ACEs for short. It's basically a way to catalog the different kinds of trauma a child might have gone through. And what they found is, well, it's stark.
The studies show this incredibly clear, direct link. The more traumas a child experiences, meaning the higher their ACE score, the greater their risk for having trouble with learning and managing their behavior down the line. So, what does that actually look like in the real world, in a classroom? Well, it looks exactly like the kind of struggles we started with. It's that impaired concentration, because the brain is always scanning for threats. It's difficulty regulating emotions. It's impulsive behavior. And maybe worst of all, it's a breakdown of trust in adults, the very foundation you need for a healthy relationship between a teacher and a student. So when you put all this together, the biology, the brain science, the data, it leads us to this really profound and I think really necessary shift in how we see things. You know, we started with that old question, the one that comes from a place of frustration and frankly a misunderstanding of the brain. It's a question that puts all the blame right on the child's shoulders. But when you look at it through this new lens, through the lens of neuroscience, it changes everything. It lets us ask a totally different question, a much deeper, more compassionate, and honestly, a way more useful question. What is this child's nervous system trying to adapt to? And that shift in questioning, that's the whole key. It moves us from a place of blame to a place of understanding. We can start to see the behavior not as some personal flaw, but as a brilliant, if painful, adaptation. And only then, once we understand, can we start creating the kind of safe environments that allow for both healing and learning. You know, there's this really powerful metaphor for this idea that every child has a little scientist inside them, just totally driven by curiosity and exploration. But when that child is forced to focus on just surviving, that little scientist, it has to go on hold. But, and this is the beautiful part, once the environment becomes safe again, that little scientist can come back out and get back to its natural, wonderful job, to learn. Which really leaves us with this final and I think very powerful thought. The brain's ability to adapt, its neuroplasticity, is the very thing that causes these challenges in the first place. But it's also our greatest source of hope. Because if a brain can be rewired for danger, it absolutely holds the remarkable capacity to be rewired again, this time for safety, for support, and for understanding.